Good afternoon to all the participants and welcome on board to this edition of JMITRA Scientific Seminar. I welcome all of you to this edition and it's indeed a pleasure to have you today in the weekend. And a warm good afternoon to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Manvi Gupta, who is joining us all the way from Ludhiana. Good afternoon, madam.
Good afternoon, Dr. Banu.
And it's a real pleasure to have you on board today. So to begin up with the proceedings for the session, I would like to reiterate to all the participants that this particular session is like a scientific session with a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. So feel free to ask the questions and you can pop your questions into the question and answer box or in the chat box and we will take it at the conclusion of it. On the other hand, I would like to reiterate that you can keep your questions limited to the theme and not away from the theme so that our speaker can answer on the variability of that particular theme also. And to begin with, we do have Dr. Manvi Gupta, and she is an esteemed pathologist and she has completed her MBBS from Government Medical College, Patiala, and went on to do her internship from the same institute in 2004. She completed her MD Pathology in Dayanand Medical College in Ludhiana, and she is having a keen theme of research in cytology and pathology and has contributed a lot in terms of the research aspect and has published numerous publications in peer-reviewed journals and has extended her expertise to all the fellow students and to the fraternity by attending various workshops across the country. She has been a senior resident in Department of Pathology and Blood Bank in Dayanand Medical College in Ludhiana. And she has been consultant with Metropolis and other labs for the last few years. So today she would be speaking on vitamin deficiencies, specifically on vitamin D and B12, and also to the ailments which are related to these deficiencies. And then she will take on board with the diagnosis and also the challenges which come across with these kind of deficiencies. So it's all the way to Dr. Manvi Gupta. Madam, I'm enabling the share screen for you. So you can start off with your presentation.
Right, thank you, sir. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sharbanu. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Manvi Gupta, consultant pathologist at MG Path Lab, Ludhiana. First of all, I would like to thank JMITRA for giving me this opportunity to share this platform with all of you. Making this presentation has been fun and it has been a good learning experience for me too. I've tried to keep it as concise as possible, and I do hope all of you like it. So my topic for today is vitamins, D and B12, the associated ailments, diagnosis, and road to recovery. So vitamins, as we all know, it comes from the Latin word vita, which means life. And these are the organic components in food that are required in very small amount, but they are very essential for growth and for maintaining a good health. On the basis of their solubility, they are classified into two main types, the fat soluble and the water soluble. So the fat soluble vitamins are those which dissolve in fat, and these can be stored within our fat and they can be accumulated and saved for later use. These include the vitamins A, D, E, and K. The water soluble vitamins dissolve in water. So as our body is a watery environment, these vitamins can move through our body pretty easily, and they can also be flushed out by the kidneys. So these include vitamin B complex and C. Well, for today, we'll limit our discussion to vitamin D and B12, and I'll be discussing these under the following headings: the introduction, structure, functions, sources, causes of deficiency, diagnosis, and the treatment. So starting with vitamin D, it is also known as cholecalciferol, calciferol, the anti-rachitic factor, and most importantly, the sunshine vitamin. So it is a fat-soluble vitamin which is synthesized in the body once the body is exposed to sunlight. Nearly 1 billion people worldwide have vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency. So vitamin D now, as we know, is regarded as a hormone as it can be synthesized in the body. It is released in the circulation. It has distinct target organs, and the action is very similar to steroid hormones. There are two major forms or provitamins of vitamin D. One is the ergosterol, which is D2, which is the basic building block in plants, and 7-dehydrocholesterol, the basic building block of vitamin D in humans. So the chart here shows the activation and formation of vitamin D. So the provitamin D3, that is the 7-dehydrocholesterol in humans on exposure to sunlight, is activated to vitamin D3. Similarly, the provitamin D2 in plants and other sources is activated to vitamin D2. These are then bound to the D binding protein in the circulation and taken to the liver, and it is converted to 25-hydroxycalciferol, also known as calcidiol. This is further taken up by the kidney, and there, under the action of alpha hydroxylase, it is converted into 1,25-dihydroxycholecalciferol, also known as calcitriol. So this 1,25-dihydroxycholecalciferol, also active form of vitamin D, which acts in the body. The functions, coming on to the functions, the main function of calcitriol or vitamin D is to maintain the normal plasma level of calcium and phosphorus. And this happens by the action on intestine, bones, and kidney. So in this process, it is helped by the parathyroid hormone. The parathyroid hormone is secreted by the parathyroid glands situated in the neck. So whenever the plasma calcium level is lowered, the parathyroid hormone level is increased. This leads to increased formation of calcitriol in the body. The calcitriol acts on the bones, leading to increased mobilization from the bone, increased absorption of calcium in the intestine, a decreased excretion from the kidney, and an increased reabsorption in the kidney. So all these actions together, they lead to increased plasma calcium level. Apart from this, vitamin D also serves various functions like improving the heart function. It enhances the brain development. It strengthens the immune system. It is essential for strong bones and teeth. It strengthens the muscular function, and it also provides anti-cancer effect. So as we see, it is a one outfit for all. It is anti-aging, anti-cancer, anti-diabetes, anti-infective, antidepressant, anti-hypertensive, and a cardioprotective hormone. So the sources, the main source of vitamin D, as we all know, is sunshine. Apart from that, the food sources include the dairy products, cheese, margarine, butter, cereals, and fish. The recommended daily allowance for vitamin D up to the age of 1 year is 400 international units, whereas from 1 to 70 years of age, which includes the pregnancy as well as the lactation period, it is 600 international unit. For elderlies, it is 800 international units per day. Coming on to the cause of deficiency. So the primary cause is inadequate exposure to sunlight. As we all know, we all avoid going out in the sun these days. Apart from that, the people who are homebound or people living in northern latitudes, individuals who wear covered clothes, or people working in occupations like mining, which prevents their exposure to sunlight. A decreased synthesis of vitamin D in skin, which could be either in people with dark skin. So people with dark skin, they have a greater amount of pigment melanin, and this results in reduced ability of the skin to produce vitamin D. Excessive use of sunscreens have also been implicated in decreased synthesis of vitamin D by the body. A decreased synthesis in the body can also be due to health conditions that involve parathyroid gland, kidney, or the liver. It occurs in aging and in individuals with genetic susceptibility. Inadequate dietary intake, particularly in people who are strictly vegetarian. So the diet does not include egg, fish, meat, which are good animal sources of vitamin D. Malabsorption states like Crohn's disease, celiac disease also lead to decreased intestinal absorption of vitamin D, leading to its deficiency. Now, in infants who are breastfed, if the mother is vitamin D deficient, the children also are bound to have vitamin D deficiency. Obesity. Obesity is a great risk factor for vitamin D deficiency. Fat cells, they extract vitamin D from the blood and affect its release into the circulation. So obese people are at a greater risk of vitamin D deficiency. The deficiency of vitamin D, it causes rickets in children and osteomalacia in adults. So the rickets presents as a decreased serum calcium level with soft and pliable bones, bone deformities, delayed dentition, and delayed closure of the fontanella. Whereas in osteomalacia, again, which is also known as the adult rickets, we see a decreased serum calcium. Insufficient mineralization of the bones lead to soft and pliable bones, increased osteoporosis, bone deformities, and increased tendency for fractures. Apart from that, it also leads to sleep changes, a low mood, feeling of fatigue, back pain, muscle and bone pains, and frequent infections, frequent coughs and colds. The diagnosis of vitamin D deficiency is a triad of clinical features, the radiological picture, and the biochemical findings. So clinically, in children, the earliest bony lesion, the earliest sign to be seen is craniotabes. So these are small, round, unossified areas in the membranous bones. So whenever the pressure is applied, it leads to inward buckling of the parietal bone. And as soon as we release the pressure, the elastic recoil, it snaps the bone back to their original position. Apart from that, there can be bossing of the frontal bones. There is delayed closure of the anterior fontanella, as we see here. There can be bowing of legs, known as genu varum, knock knees or windswept knees, also known as genu valgum. There is prominence of the costochondral junction, which is known as rachitic rosary. There may be pot belly, kyphosis, lordosis, or scoliosis, the spine deformities, particularly in children who start walking. So the picture here again emphasizes the 10 important clinical features in rickets, which include a delayed closure of the interior fontanella with wide sutures, the frontal bossing, there is dental hyperplasia, there is pigeon-shaped chest, the pectus carinatum, swelling of the wrist and ankle joints. The wrist joints are more swollen in children who are crawling, and ankle joints are swollen in children who start walking. Craniotabes, rachitic rosary, the Harrison's sulcus, and the bowing of legs. So in adults, it presents as bony pains, muscular weakness. There can be spinal deformities like kyphosis, scoliosis, a waddling gait, and the individuals are more prone to fractures. Radiologically, the wrist x-rays are preferred. So in the lower wrist x-ray, we see the concavity of the metaphysis is increased, which is known as cupping. The metaphyseal end of the bone is more widened, which is seen as widening of the wrist. This is known as playing. And the growth plate shows irregularity, which is known as fraying. Whereas in case of adults, if we get the hip x-rays, there is a decreased bone density, which may show erased or fuzzy type of demineralization, a coarse trabecular pattern, and a loss of cortical definition. Very importantly, we can see pseudofractures, which are also known as the loser zones. So these are linear radiolucencies, which we can see, and they occur bilaterally and symmetrically. The common sites are femoral necks, the pubic and the ischial rami, ribs, and axillary margins of the scapula. Apart from this, we can see the true fractures, or in the vertebra, we can see the Codwisch vertebra, that is the bilateral concavity of the vertebra. Coming on to the lab investigations. Testing of the serum vitamin D levels, which can be done by various techniques, which include the ELISA, the radioimmunoassay, fluorescence immunoassay, and the chemiluminescence. So the slide here compares the various methods. Their principles: ELISA is based on enzyme reaction, the RIA is based on radioactivity, the fluorescence is the principle of FIA, and CLIA is based on light emission. So the sensitivity and specificity, as we see, is high in case of CLIA and is low in case of ELISA. Whereas ELISA takes a lot of time for the test to be performed. The results are more rapid in CLIA and FIA. But however, the cost of the machinery and the cost of testing is low in ELISA as compared to other procedures. So the slide here presents the normal ranges for vitamin D. A level more than 30 nanogram per ml is considered normal, whereas a deficiency occurs to a level of 10 to 19 nanogram per ml, and individuals with less than 10 nanogram per ml are severely deficient. Other biochemical findings include a low serum calcium, a low serum phosphorus, increased serum alkaline phosphatase, and increased parathyroid hormone levels. The urinary calcium levels are also decreased. So coming on to the treatment and prevention. So the treatment includes either the oral doses or the injectable doses, depending on the individuals. So oral doses are around 60,000 units once or twice a week for 8 to 10 weeks, whereas the injectable dose is 6 lakh international units STAT. The repeat X-rays are to be done to see the healing line of rickets, which is a provisional line of calcification, which indicates the bone recovery. This is followed by the maintenance dose. Very important, along with the treatment of vitamin D deficiency, is calcium supplementation. So for prevention, as we all know, a sun exposure is required. So around 5 to 30 minutes of exposure of arms and legs twice a week should be done, should be the goal. To prevent vitamin D deficiency in infants, 400 international unit per day from diet and supplements is necessary till the age of 2 years. In pregnant and lactating mothers, they should take around 400 to 600 international units, again as supplements. For elderly, to reduce the rate of fractures, again, 800 international units should be supplemented with diet. Fortification of food and consumption of dairy products is recommended to prevent vitamin D deficiency. So with this, I conclude vitamin D. Coming on to our second vitamin for the day is vitamin B12. So vitamin B12, as also known by other names, cyanocobalamin, the anti-pernicious anemia factor, and the extrinsic factor of Castle. It is one of the 8 B vitamins and has the most complex structure. It is water soluble, but it is rapidly degraded in light, so it has to be stored at a dark place. There are 4 forms of B12, and each of these, they have a different R group, which is also known as the ligand. So the 4 forms include cyanocobalamin, hydroxy, methyl, and adenosylcobalamin. So the figure here shows cyanocobalamin, and as we see, it has the cyanide group. It's a stable form and it is stable during processing and storage. So it is used for food fortification, multivitamins, and B12 supplements. Hydroxycobalamin has hydroxy group, and this is used for the IV or IM injections for vitamin B12 deficiency, and it is also used in cyanide poisoning. Methylcobalamin has a methyl group, and it is used in the treatment of neuropathies, peripheral, diabetic, and in the preliminary treatment for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. The last is the adenosylcobalamin, which is also known as coenzyme B12. It is a very active form of vitamin B12 and is also the storage form. Now coming on to the absorption of vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 from the food combines to a protein called heptocorrin. The heptocorrin is secreted by the salivary glands. So the B12 heptocorrin complex, it moves to the stomach, and from here it goes on to the duodenum. Within the duodenum, the juices from the pancreas, the pancreatic proteases, it lyses and removes the heptocorrin from B12, and this B12 now binds to intrinsic factor, which is released from the parietal cells in the stomach. This complex then further transfers to ileum, where it is absorbed. The intrinsic factor is removed and B12 is absorbed into the terminal ileum. From here, B12 is transported via transcobalamin, most importantly, transcobalamin 2. This is transported to liver and it is stored in liver, which is the main storehouse of B12 in our body. So coming on to the functions of B12, vitamin B12, the first and foremost function is DNA synthesis, which helps in cell formation, blood formation, formation of the RBCs and other blood cells, and mucous membranes. It is required for energy production, physical performance, and vitality. It is an important part of lipid metabolism. So it protects the cell membrane and protection of the nerves and brain. It is required for formation of various hormones and neurotransmitters, as we'll see in the coming slides. And it is also required for detoxification of cyanide, homocysteine, nitric oxide. So as we see, all these actions are exerted through two main pathways. The two major pathways on which vitamin B12 acts are the conversion of homocysteine to methionine and the conversion of methyl malonyl-CoA to succinyl-CoA. So I'll be taking up these individually. B12 is required in the catabolism of odd chain fatty acids and branch chain amino acids. So the odd chain fatty acids, cholesterol, and the branch chain amino acids like methionine, threonine, isoleucine, valine, they all are metabolized to form propionyl-CoA. The propionyl-CoA further in the presence of enzyme and biotin is converted to methyl malonyl-CoA, and this methyl malonyl-CoA is finally converted in the presence of vitamin B12 to succinyl-CoA. Now, in case of B12 deficiency, the final step does not happen, and there is an accumulation of methyl malonyl-CoA. Now, with the excess of methyl malonyl-CoA in the body, what happens is the excess methyl malonyl-CoA is converted to methyl malonic acid. This methyl malonic acid is accumulated in the blood, leads to methylmalonemia, and is excreted in the urine as methyl malonic aciduria. The accumulation, it leads to demyelination of the nerves and leads to axonal neuropathy in the spinal cord. These leads to the neural symptoms associated with B12 deficiency. The second pathway that we see is the conversion of homocysteine to methionine. Homocysteine, as we see, is converted to methionine, and this step requires the conversion of methylcobalamin to cobalamin. The importance of B12 lies here is it helps in conversion of homocysteine to methionine. And along with that, this B12, it frees folate. Folate is saved as N-methyl tetrahydrofolate. Because of this B12, this is released into the circulation as tetrahydrofolate. This tetrahydrofolate further takes part in the synthesis of DNA. Now, in B12 deficiency, this whole cycle is hampered, and we see that there is an accumulation of homocysteine, reduction of methionine, the folate is trapped, and there is decreased DNA synthesis. So the slide explains, with the increase in homocysteine because of reduced conversion, there is increased brain damage and cognitive disturbances. Due to a reduced methionine synthesis, the myelin formation is decreased and the neurotransmitters are also not formed. Since the folate is trapped and it is not available for use, there is a folic acid deficiency. The impaired DNA synthesis because of reduced folic acid availability, both of these, they affect nuclear maturation. So in case of marrow, the nuclear maturation does not occur in the proliferating erythroblasts, whereas the cytoplasm, it matures. So this leads to formation of macrocytes. These macrocytes are rapidly destroyed in the marrow, and this leads to genesis of the anemia, which we see in B12 deficiency. So the slide again explains, with the B12 deficiency, there is demyelination, which leads to neurological diseases and subacute combined degeneration of the spinal cord. Whereas on the other hand, the B12 deficiency, which leads to further folic acid deficiency because of the folate trap, there is a reductionist DNA synthesis. Because of the reduced DNA synthesis, the proliferating erythroblasts, they are large, they have cytoplasm maturation, but the nuclear maturation lags behind. So these macrocytes are readily destroyed in the marrow, and they are leading to megaloblastic anemia. Inadequate DNA synthesis also affects the rapidly growing tissues like tongue, mucous membranes, which leads to effects like glossitis and ulcerations and other effects. So the sources of vitamin D are mainly animal sources: seafood like shellfish, fish, crabs, meat, and most importantly, liver, which is the biggest source of vitamin B12. So the slide shows the recommended daily allowance for vitamin B12. So in infants up to 6 months, it is 0.4 micrograms. So over the ages, it increases to 0.5, 0.9, and in adults, it is 2.4 microgram. In case of pregnancy and breastfeeding, the level increases to 2.6 microgram. Coming on to the causes of deficiency. So the first and foremost is inadequate intake. In case of individuals, as we see, B12 cannot be synthesized in the body, and it is mainly absorbed from the animal diet. So strict vegetarians are at a greater risk of B12 deficiency. Along with that, alcoholism leads to inadequate B12 absorption. The second would be defective transport, which could be due to transcobalamin deficiency. Third cause is malabsorption, either malabsorption from the food or due to lack of intrinsic factor or the parietal cells. This could be due to pernicious anemia, which is a deficiency of intrinsic factor in the body, which is an autoimmune disease. Others could be bypass or gastrectomy, the H. pylori infection, B12 malabsorption, or gastritis. Along with this, intestinal malabsorptions could be due to Crohn's disease, bacterial overgrowth, or the ileal resections. So coming on to the diagnosis of B12 deficiency. So as we see, B12 is affecting the nervous system as well as the RBCs. So we see the symptoms accordingly. The patients, they present with anemia, a pale skin, palpitations, shortness of breath, and fatigue due to anemia. The mucous membranes, they show ulcers in the mouth or angular stomatitis or cheilitis. what we call, or a beefy tongue due to loss of the papilla. The hands, the fingers, they show hyperpigmentation over the knuckles. Some cases may present with jaundice because of the ineffective erythropoiesis and the large macrocytes. These are readily destroyed in the periphery, leading to hemolysis and jaundice. There may be disturbed vision. Neurological changes comprise, firstly and foremostly, since the peripheral nerves are involved, so the patients, they complained of paresthesias, and these are mostly the glove and the stocking type of paresthesias affecting the arms and the legs. Then there may be tingling and numbness, the sensation of pins and needles within the hands. As the posterior column is involved, the patients, they complain of difficulty in balance. And later on, there may be neuropsychiatric symptoms, which include illusions, hallucinations, dementia, memory malfunction, anxiety, depression. So coming on to the diagnosis. So first and foremost, the hemogram, it reveals anemia. And if we see, the mean corpuscular volume in these cases is strikingly raised and is between 110 to 140 femtoliter. In cases with severe B12 deficiency, we might also see pancytopenia, that is a decrease in platelets and leukocytes along with anemia. So that is leukopenia and thrombocytopenia along with anemia. So on examining the peripheral blood film, we might find anisopoikilocytosis, the presence of large RBCs, which are called macrocytes. They may be oval in shape, macroovalocytes. Along with that, we see target cells, the teardrop cells. There may be polychromasia and certain nucleated RBCs in the PBF, basophilic stippling, and hypersegmented neutrophils. So the slide here shows the presence of macrocytes, the large RBCs, and we can compare the size with the size of a normal mature lymphocyte. The slide shows macroovalocytes, the teardrop cells, and hypersegmented neutrophils. So hypersegmented neutrophils are the neutrophils with 5 or more lobes. So for diagnosis, 5% of neutrophils having 5 lobes or even a single neutrophil with 6 lobes is diagnostic. The presence of nucleated RBCs, the RBCs in which the nucleus is still persistent. We might see basophilic stippling. So the basophilic stippling, these are the RNA fragments within the cytoplasm that are stained. So coming on to the bone marrow examination. So the bone marrow shows marked erythroid hyperplasia. So there is a reversal of the myeloid erythroid ratio within the bone marrow. And this is a response because of defective red cell production, which is the ineffective erythropoiesis. So within the marrow, the erythroid series shows presence of megaloblasts. So these megaloblasts are the large erythroid cells which have abnormally large nucleus with a sieve-like chromatin. Within the myeloid series, we see presence of giant metamyelocytes. So all these cells are present because there is asynchronous maturation of the nucleus and cytoplasm. Since the DNA formation is impaired, the nuclear maturation is lagging behind the cytoplasmic maturation. So this leads to formation of large cells, the large erythroid cells known as megaloblasts, and the large myeloid giant metamyelocytes. So the slide here shows erythroid hyperplasia with increased in erythroid cells as compared to the myeloid cells. These are the large megaloblasts, a large cell with a large nucleus and a sieve-like chromatin. These are the giant metamyelocytes present in the bone marrow. Coming on to the biochemical findings. So serum vitamin B12 assays, which again can be done by ELISA, the radioimmunoassays, the fluorescence, or the chemiluminescence assays. So the levels, so in case the levels are less than 211 picogram per ml, it is probably vitamin B12 deficiency. level of 211 to 406 is a gray zone, whereas more than 406 is normal. But still, this test of vitamin B12 is the accuracy is low because there is a lack of gold standard and the cutoff values are inconsistent. So it is different for different labs. So the total B12 assay is not a very sensitive indicator. Apart from that, the total B12 is also measuring the amount of B12 that is bound to heptocorrin. But this B12 bound to heptocorrin is not bioavailable for the cells. So a measure of total B12 assay is not a very good indicator of the vitamin B12 levels. Also, the total B12 is influenced by the amount of heptocorrin. So if the heptocorrin is increased or decreased, the results would be affected. So the second test in this series include the methylmalonic acid and homocysteine. Methylmalonic acid and homocysteine levels are more sensitive for detection of vitamin B12 because these are raised early in tissue deficiency even before the hematological changes are observed. But however, these tests also have their limitations. The methylmalonic acid can be high in elderly individuals, in cases with renal impairment, and in hypovolemic states. So while interpreting the results, we have to keep these conditions in mind. Similarly, with the plasma homocysteine level, the limitations again are in aging, in renal impairment, and along with that, smoking, coffee, wine, and also folate deficiency. A folate deficiency also leads to increased homocysteine level. So that has to be kept in mind. Another indicator is the holotranscobalamin. Now, as we see in the body, B12 is bound to heptocorrin and to transcobalamin. So around 75% of the B12 that is bound to heptocorrin is inactive. It is not available for use. Whereas the 25% that is bound to transcobalamin is the active form and it is available for use. So the measurement of the B12 that is bound to transcobalamin 2 is known as the holotranscobalamin or the active B12 assay. This assay has a better sensitivity and specificity for assessing B12 status as it is not affected by the heptocorrin levels. And it is in very early stages, it is deranged, but still it is not being used as a first line test as the availability is limited and the cost is high. So the chart here again shows how to go about B12 deficiency. So in case after testing the levels are extremely low, so it definitely signifies the deficiency is there. But in case of gray zones, we can go in for the holotranscobalamin levels. Again, in holotranscobalamin levels, if the level are low, that means the deficiency is there. But if in case of the gray zones, we then again can go in for the measurements of methylmalonic acid or homocysteine for confirmation. But again, for both these tests, the excluding parameters have to be kept in mind. That is the renal impairment, the age, or the volume depletion. So for treatment and prevention for B12, oral supplements can be given, or the B12 injections, cyanocobalamin. These are 1,000 microgram injections. They are recommended 3 times per week for around 2 weeks in case the patient has no neurological deficit. But in cases of neurological deficits, it is given daily for 3 weeks. But generally, the thing that has to be kept in mind is that the individuals in which the causes are irreversible, like as in pernicious anemia, the treatment has to be continued lifelong. Whereas in those cases in which it is related to diet or inadequate intake or other correctable conditions, the treatments and the oral supplementations lead to resolving of the symptoms. Another thing that has to be kept in mind is if the B12 deficiency coexists with the folate deficiency, the B12 deficiency should be replaced first so that the neural symptoms don't appear. So the slide again shows the time taken for the improvement of the abnormalities. So the earliest abnormality to be improved is the reticulocyte count within 1 week, along with the homocysteine or the methylmalonic acid levels. The neurological symptoms, they take around 6 weeks to 3 months, whereas the MCV thrombocytopenia take around 8 weeks. So for prevention, we need a good diet, including animal and dairy products and food fortification. So always remember, prevention is better than cure. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Manvi, for that elaborate discussion what we had. I mean to say, you have presented probably every slide which comes across the physiology and biochemistry class. I think we had a rewind to our graduation and post-graduation days, and I think you have addressed it very, what you can say, in detail. Now, if I may start on with the question and answer session. So just to bring about with the questions which I have found out, some of them have asked, like, you have dealt with all the age groups and you have also bifurcated like the people who are much more vulnerable. Now, keeping in context with the Indian population, which particular age group would you find like is more vulnerable to vitamin deficiencies, keeping in mind that we are highly varied with terms of socioeconomic strata in the country?
So first of all, I think the infants, because most of the mothers, they are deficit, and the infants, they carry the deficiency from the mothers themselves. Secondly is the elderly population. But as far as I feel, differentiation these days is not that much, because at every stage, the deficiencies are there. It's not about not just the infants, not just the elderly people, even young individuals, they present with all these deficiencies. So I feel we need to be careful at every level, though more stress has to be given to the young ones, the infants and the elderly population, to prevent complications in them. But I think we should be vigilant at all levels.
Well, that is one part of it. I think there is a skepticism with one of our audience who is asking that although we have addressed the deficiencies and we have highlighted the diagnostic pattern, now what they are asking is, like, if there are comorbidities, for example, we do have certain ailments like celiac, or for that matter, we do have recovery from some kind of a transplant or operations, or for that even from oncological background. How do you think that vitamin deficiency, or should I say a drop in vitamin levels, either way, how it can be addressed in terms of road to recovery?
So in case of conditions like which are chronic, which are there bound to stay, so like say for malabsorptions, the celiac, so these conditions, they stay for long. So in these individuals, they have to be on regular supplements for both the vitamins, because both D and B12 deficiencies are known to occur in these individuals. So they have to be kept and they have to be counseled that way, that they have to be on long D and B12 treatments. Because for the ailments that are treated acutely or for a short, like for diarrheas or for malabsorptions, still they can be treated in acute phases with a maintenance dose. But for the diseases which are persisting for longer times, these people will have to take the therapies for as long as they have to.
Well, they are also asking,
like cancer patients, all of
yeah,
that.
yeah, because even I have seen in certain cases like oncology, what you can say, transforms from one particular domain to the other. But
Right.
at the penultimate stages, the dietitians come on board when it comes in terms of the counseling and everything, and then they talk about the so-called dietary implications and what will be their near course of recovery. So it becomes a challenge for the doctor itself, whoever is like the primary doctor.
Sure.
It becomes a huge challenge to address the vitamin deficiencies if it is there at all. So the second thing they are asking is, with respect to the length and breadth of the country, we do have varied food habits. Now we
Right.
do understand the composition of vitamin and certain elements. So just in general, what would you say the basic elements should be there in terms of the food so that there is no deficiency, or should I say it is contained at a limited level?
So, as I feel, the socioeconomic strata in our country, there are every kind of people, people affording, people non-affording. So, as far as vitamin D is concerned, what we see is ki it's synthesized in the body on exposure to sun. So, I think that is available to everybody, right? So, sun exposure should be into our schedules at least twice a week, at least. Rather than staying inside, we should include more of outside activities, a bit of exercising, and along with that, dairy products. I do agree some people might be not be affording for the dairy products. Eggs is not okay with everybody, but milk,
Mm,
yes,
yeah.
milk of course everybody can include in their diet, right? Rather than going on to tea and all, taking milk as such. Similarly, for vitamin B12, though the source is mainly non-vegetarian, but for vegetarian, there are sources like soya bean, there are sources like other green vegetables. So I think people should have and should try to make it into their eating habits rather than going on eating other things. They should inculcate these good eating practices.
Well, I would hardly any doubt on that. I mean to say, everybody should be very much aware on it. But there are certain doctors who are there in the audience, and they have asked, like, keeping in terms of the various diagnostic patterns which you have already highlighted,
Right.
they're asking, like, which particular method should be used for diagnosing vitamin D3, because there is an absence of gold standard which you have already mentioned. In that case, which should be the ideal method for D3 specifically?
Sir, with the coming up modalities, we started with ELISA, and then radio immunoassays are obsolete because of the radioactivity part.
Yeah.
Then there are fluorescence immunoassays and chemiluminescence assays. So as far as the sensitivity and specificity is concerned, I would like to stress that CLIA is definitely a good option for detection. But in cases or at places where the CLIA machines cannot be installed, or because of the cost factor, because the machines are expensive and they require a particular load to be done. So at that places, we can definitely go in for ELISA-based processes.
Yeah.
The results are equally good, though the procedure is time consuming, but the cost is low.
Okay. Now, they are also asking, like, what would be the side effect? Now, it's a reversal question. Like, if there are huge intakes of vitamins in specifically in a youth, okay, or for that matter, people who are doing loads of exercise or taking multivitamins to keep themselves healthy and so-called energetic, whatever they might be, what would be the possible side effects to it?
So in case of vitamin B12, it's a water soluble vitamin. So the excess is definitely drained out of the body. So as such, I don't think so there have been any toxic effects of B12. Definitely vitamin D leads to hypervitaminosis, and there are different symptoms presenting with blurring vision and raised intracranial tensions and all that. So once the supplementation has been started, and if anybody was deficit and he started taking the multivitamins and he's already gone through the regular course, so I think people should shift to the maintenance doses, that is like a single dose once a month, rather than taking regular doses for longer periods. Or other thing is that they can get their vitamins annually checked if they are affording.
Okay, now this brings to I mean to say, it opens up Pandora's box, because now if you are recommending from, like, you have been practicing for a long time, how would you recommend that? How frequent it should be checked then?
So at least once a year. At
Okay.
least once a year. See, I don't think so. Everybody is that paying or that affording that they can get it twice a year. So I think at least once a year, or once in 2 years at least.
Okay. Now, here is the point actually, because see, we do have national.
Vitamin D, as far as I see, vitamin D, like with I've been practicing for long. People who got their levels corrected, and again within a year they present with lower levels because the maintenance is not there. Again, the sun exposure is not there. Dietary habits are bad. So people have to learn that along with the maintenance doses, they have to also resort to the natural sources, that is like sunlight exposure and good diet. So that has to be incorporated so that the levels which have been achieved with the therapy are maintained. Otherwise,
Well,
they'll have to revert back to the therapy again.
Well, I understand that. I think this opens up one particular lacuna. Like if you have observed that we do have national programs for diabetes, because you mentioned obesity also at one point, and
Yeah.
you mentioned about the national programs which are there with other ailments also. Even for celiac also, we do have a part and partial programs which are under the state chapters. Now, don't you think that this is the high time that across the India, or should I say even for a state, like you are there in Punjab, we do need some kind of an awareness program or national program, and how would it be incorporated? How do you think?
So I think vitamin D definitely requires a program because if the mothers are well educated for the vitamin D, and if the children are having a good levels from the start until the age of 2 years, it affects their growth and it leads to their better development. So the programs enhancing nutrition in children, in mothers, as well as for the elderlies. So I think that's a good idea that it should be there should be programs, but I don't know how viable they would be. How
Okay.
easy it is to
Well, it's
incorporate.
easy said than done. I can
Yeah,
absolutely concur on that.
yeah.
The last question what I have for you is that somebody is asking like, what would be the implications of neurological symptoms with respect to vitamin B specifically, and are these neurological symptoms permanent, lifelong?
So the neurological symptoms, depending on what the level has been and for how long the deficiency has been there, they depend from paresthesias to the to tingling sensations, and then they can progress on to the involvement of the spinal cord as well. Not all symptoms are reversible.
Now, I do have from my, this is from my perspective, I'm just asking like a common man. Just imagine we do have comorbidities. We have discussed so many of them. Okay. Now we haven't touched upon the mortality. And I'm just asking from one perspective to the other, do you really think that in a country like India, where it is very late, or should I say the affordability also takes one chance of it, do you think that we are actually mapping some kind of mortality with respect to vitamin deficiency, one or the other way?
Uh, I don't know, sir. Matlab, see,
Or let
deficiency
me
of
ask you,
any
like, have you come
kind.
across any mortality in your experience?
See, mortality directly because of vitamin D deficiency is not, but yes, mortality could be in the fact like elderlies with vitamin D deficiencies who were more prone to fractures, they had fracture femurs, and that led to mortality.
Well, I would,
They fell off in the
yeah,
washrooms, and
I
that
agree to it.
bad kinds.
Well, I think uh, this particular, what you can say, debate is never going to end. I mean to say, I think everybody has to be much more aware, and you have presented it very, what you can say, precisely, that what is the mechanism and what are the alternatives to it also, and what is available to us free of cost. So I think there should not be any doubt to it. So before we conclude, just allow me to share my screen, and there is something I would like to present to you, Dr. Manvi, and that is this particular, your certificate for appreciation. And we really salute you for all the contribution which you are making in your domain. And we look forward to have you aboard in future also. And it was
Thank you.
indeed a great pleasure to have you today and learn a lot about the particularly. So a warm, what you can say, kudos to you, and thanks a million for what you can say, acknowledging our invitation and coming on board. So
Well, thank you,
with
sir,
this,
for this appreciation. And this session has been equally informative for me as well, as I revised all my concepts. And it was really enjoyable doing it after a
well,
long time.
well, I can't agree more on that, and I really thank all the participants also. So with this, we conclude this particular session of our JSS over here, and we will be back with similar session next month. And we have already introduced the poll, so I have got some interesting results. So we will keep considering the suggestions which we have got from our participants and all the attendees. So with this, I conclude this particular session, and thank you one and all, and enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.